everybody. Welcome. This is the first of our fall 2024 programming, so welcome back to all of us. I'm Erin Lehman. I'm the director of the Holtzman and the Center for the Arts Galleries here. Tonight we're celebrating the opening of two exhibitions, Women's Rights Are Human Rights, International Posters on Gender-Based Inequality, Violence, and Discrimination, which is in the CA Gallery upstairs. Organized by design curator Elizabeth Resnick and brought to Towson by Professor of Graphic Design Kim Hopkins. And also Linda Brenner Understory is in the Holtzman Gallery on this floor. So this panel discussion is followed by a reception for both exhibitions. We hope that you'll join us for those as well. Thank you to Kim for bringing the exhibition and to our new curator, Kati Gaidos, for jumping in and creating such an amazing vision for this exhibition. And I am also always required to say that in the case of an emergency, we shall make an orderly exit. There's an exit there and there. And now, Kim.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Kim Hopkins. I'm the area coordinator and associate professor of graphic design here at Towson University. Thank you very much for coming out tonight for this lecture. We're very excited to have a panel to discuss all these wonderful topics. Quick note for the students, there are papers in the back on the table. If you are getting credit for coming here tonight, you want to make sure that you sign up on those forms. You don't have to do that right this second, but they're back there for you before you leave today. Couple other little things. After the panel concludes, we do hope that you join us upstairs for the exhibition at the Center for the Arts. Right outside the gallery tonight, there'll be a table where you can get more information on voting from Sharice Lawson, the coordinator of civic engagement at TU. And there'll also be information on the human rights and history minor at TU from the program coordinator, Dr. Kimberly Katz, who I think might be here. Are you in the audience? Okay. So those will be right outside the gallery door. If you're interested in either of those two things, please stop by. The Women's Rights as Human Rights exhibition has been traveling the world since 2016. We're really honored to have it here. And if you'd like to learn more about the exhibition, there's a website, it's Women's Rights as Human Rights.org. So tonight's panel is positioned to bring diverse perspectives on women's rights and gender equality via a 2024 lens, and offer new considerations and avenues for faculty's research and fellowship. So I'm just going to introduce them briefly, and then the floor will be theirs. So first we have Dr. Desirée Rowe, Associate Professor of Communication Studies. They received their interdisciplinary PhD in 2009 from the Hugh Downs School of Human Communication at Arizona State University. Desiree's research digs into the tangible, embodied interactions of our cool fantasies of life through queer performance ethnography, art-based methods, and critical qualitative intervention. Her investigations center on negativity in two ways. First, through reparative negativity, a la Sedgwick, that allows space for reframing and re-envisioning institutions and institutional life. And second, through embracing a contradictory negativity, one that is an unruly, anti-productive, or unwell negativity. She currently serves as the associate editor of the Performance Space in Text and Performance Quarterly. And she has a solo performance coming up based on participant interviews, Wave 11222 on October 4th and 5th here at TU. Dr. Miho Iwata has a passion, associate professor, Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminal Justice, has a passion for social justice that guides her research and teaching interests. She seeks to explain social inequalities in the US and Japan using an intersectional approach. Her dissertation research examined the Japanese concept of race and racial hierarchy and how they affect foreign migrants in Japan. Dr. Iwata also co-authored As the Leaves Turn Gold, Asian Americans and the Experiences of Aging, which documents the challenges and opportunities of aging for Asian Americans. Lastly, we have Dr. Kalima Young, Assistant Professor, Department of Education, or Electronic Media and Film, sorry. Dr. Young received her PhD in American Studies from the University of Maryland, College Park. Her research explores the impact of race and gender-based trauma on Black identity, media, and cultural production. A Baltimore native, videographer, and activist. Dr. Young is also a member of Rooted, a Black LGBTQ healing collective. Her manuscript, Mediated Misogynar, Erasing Black Women's and Girls' Innocence in the Public Imagination, was released by Rowman and Littlefield Lexington Books in 2022. Okay. So I'm just going to start off the night with the first question. So, what do you see as the role of art and design in women's rights / social justice movement?
Okay, so I'm from, oh, by the way, my intro, there's no signage because I'm not that organized, but you can send me the write-up. So I further probably away from this building during my regular teaching and stuff. So I really appreciated being invited to talk about women's rights through the lens of art. But honestly, I am not expertise with art part. So I did a Google search, and according to Learning, art brings an accessible tool for communication, raising awareness about social issues affecting positive changes. So as I was thinking, perhaps art is an accessible means for many women, especially underrepresented marginalized women, to have a voice. Maybe perhaps we scholars may do research and make claims, but really those women are the ones with the lived experiences. They can express the issues that they're facing, right? So women's rights is not like just one big thing. A lot of people within different local contexts face different issues, and they can express through their art, what their claims are and what needs to be highlighted.
So being situated in the film department, electronic media and film, our work is about understanding storytelling. And when you think about social justice and women's rights, storytelling is a mechanism to raise awareness and empathy and act as a placeholder for friction. And when I say that, I talk about this concept of friction, the idea from Anna Zhang, an environmental feminist, who says, one stick alone is just a stick. Two sticks that rub together create heat and light. And our moments of friction is where we have some of our most productive moments. That's where we come up with new ways of being and thinking and perceptions and policy. And I feel that storytelling, especially through the visual medium, is a space for that to happen. Storytelling is also art-based storytelling is also an opportunity for discourse and strategy making, from reclaiming physical spaces like Confederate monuments to crafting protest signs. Both are equally valid ways of using storytelling and using visual representation. Art and design is integral to articulating social justice movements, their themes. And one of the things I've found, especially as I look at how people respond to cultural frictions and respond to social justice and inequity, is I find that one, artists are able to see around corners in ways that often policymakers, folks who are on the ground, folks who are writing laws are often unable to do that. And an artist's lens allows for an extra way of seeing that's really deliberate. And I think that's where the impact lies.
That's a really great transition. So thank you for that. So my work is centered in communication studies, but specifically performance. And so that's both solo stage performance, but also performances of everyday life and performances in the body. And I think when we talk about art and art practices as social resistance, specifically when it comes to the exhibition that's Here It to You, one thing that I'm drawn to is a question over and over again, is how do we know what we know in this space or epistemology. And for me, that answer is through the body, over and over and over and time again. So a lot like how we pull those stories. I'm thinking of the body, and especially for art and especially for the posters upstairs, the question that's resonating over and over is, how is the body speaking in these images? And how is it speaking to us? And really, most importantly, how does it motivate us towards social change? What are the affective resonances that draw us into conversation with the poster, with the image? Who is speaking? What are they saying? And how are they speaking to us, our positionality, and who we are in the world? And so there are volumes and volumes dedicated to the relationality between art and social justice movements. So I don't think we're going to have all the answers here today. But the posters upstairs really help us focus and hone in on the problem, I think, for some work that doesn't allow the body to speak. And we can see a lot of examples of the speaking body upstairs. Downstairs? Upstairs. I was right the first time. So that's first question. What's the second question?
Second question, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about that idea of affect.
Okay, so we're flowing now. Okay, let's go.
We just said we're gonna have
We
like
just-
we're doing our flow. So y'all just gonna deal with our flow. So what does that look like? Does affect look different depending on the body that is experiencing it?
Yes, well, thank you for that question. I think that absolutely. And I think in particular, what resonates for me are thinking about queer bodies, trans bodies, sick bodies, racialized bodies, and how they are or are not represented, not just in the images, but as artists in the space. What does that cross-representation look like? And for my own work in affect, I focus on negativity and really sort of hone in on monstrosity. And how does our culture create a monster? It creates a monster through feelings of fear. And we see some of the artists speaking back to that in some of the images upstairs. I was really taken by the one that shows a vulva and blood and then the fire sort of emerging. I don't know if y'all got to see that up there, but that one speaks back to monstrosity of the, fight for reproductive rights in this country, and really what that feels like. And so, yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And just sort of waxing on that image, it makes me think about in storytelling, especially in filmmaking, how oftentimes in filmmaking and visual storytelling, there's this entire conversation about reproduction as a monstrous process, right? And you have that idea of the monstrous feminine and the ways that motherhood and reproduction is used in the storytelling to thwart women's power, to show that we have like a destructive womb, that we have a womb that needs to be controlled. And when you see pieces like that, it speaks back to that idea of the monstrous femme and the storytelling.
Yeah, can I just clarify? Oh, no, go ahead. And so, but I also think what we're saying is really in direct opposition to the title of the show. Hold for applause. But the reason I say that is that title is taken from, what is it, Women's Rights or Human Rights, something. That Women's Rights and Human Rights is taken from that 1990, as a old school public speaking teacher, taken from that 1995 Hillary Rodham Clinton speech in Beijing, that is the epitome of a neoliberal politic on bodies. Just dump that on the floor and let it go.
Use that because that's the name of the show.
Yeah, no. Girl, I'm not paid for that kind of labor, but
Union forever.
Right, I just needed to put it.
From sociological perspective, embodiment, body experiences are really the thing. And, we, in my discipline, talk about structural inequality in a kind of abstract way, but in reality, it actually lands on the body of beings, their experiences. If we talk about women underpaid, it results in material consequences. if women do not have choice in the matter of reproduction, it is an embodied experience. So it is important to really look into personal private life and how whatever is going on is affecting all of us. And I think it speaks to some of the posters really featuring certain body parts, embodied experience.
Based on your research and scholarship area, how would you assess the status of women's rights in 20?
Hey, sociologist. Data, Helen.
So, first, I think that structural inequalities, including sexism, racism, it all intersect and it all hold each other up. So it's really, I think, useful to frame women's rights as human rights, right? Because it's not, you're not talking about just women's rights, you're talking about indigenous rights, all these isms that are intersecting. And also, especially within the United States, with deep roots in capitalism, liberalism, it inevitably perpetuate exploitation of certain segments of people without power. So I think that, and especially thinking more like democratic process, there's always a loser, but framing it as a human right, is all encompassing, bringing the bottom up, which is important to think about. And to begin, the United States is one of the 7 countries, including places like Sudan, Iran, for example, that has not ratified CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So that in and of itself speaks for where we are in this country, even though oftentimes the United States may be appearing to be spearheading this spirit of human rights.
Yeah, this place is nothing if not contradictory. As my mom used to say, we talking out the side of your neck, you know? So my scholarly interest is on the impact of race and gender-based trauma on Black identity, how we form our identities around trauma and Black cultural production. So one of the key ways that I look at social justice in my research is I like to illustrate the way that Black cultural workers make art when the world is constantly on fire. And that's an avenue for nailing down strategies for resilience, because Black people keep on living. You kill us, we keep on living. You enslave us, we keep on living. You do weird hip hop at the Olympics, and we still do a better job. Right? So when I had to do the ray gun, it's the first time I had a public chance to talk about ray gun. Anyway, so when I explore the work of Black women, especially those who are queer, I see a combination of hope and truth-telling at play in the work. And I use at play on purpose because there's something playful about being oppositional and having an oppositional gaze. Right? I believe Black artists make a point of providing counter narratives and sensibilities, and that sort of perspective can help hold people's feet to the fire. So we can have a contradictory moment where we have the first brown woman running for president, and we need to hold the feet to the fire, right? You can critique, but critiquing and having purity politics can often be troubling. And I think because Black folks have to sit in the contradictions of this space, not just the double consciousness, but also we hold the dual citizenship of being a part of the hegemony and then being at the bottom of it. That means you have to sit in the sort of, I'm always interested, and I see people putting out work that's bringing that contradiction to life and looking at the useful ways that we can use it to raise all boats.
The use of contradiction, I think, is a powerful intersection point. I mentioned earlier, my work is about failure and negativity, and sort of the affective or feeling resonances of those. But I'm also interested in the abject, which means like the stuff that comes out of our bodies, the the blood, the mucus, the shits, all of that, and that is a sign of humanity and humanness, but it is also something that is revolting and disgusting, and people don't like to talk about it. And so the abject then gets put upon specifically differently able bodies or sick bodies in a way that we can't look at that. We want to look away. We don't want to see that anymore. And that works against a lot of social justice movements and, you know, the ongoing genocide, the fight for reproductive rights, all of those moments, we want to look away from those moments. And so thinking about a reclamation of the abject to say, let's look at it, and rather than being disgusted by it, let's have a mutual recognition that that's a part of all bodies. That's who we are in this world, and that's how we're situated. And so space is making space for those folks to have those moments of disgust, but revel in it. Revel in the messy, revel in the disgust, and build community from those moments.
Yeah, I think it's really important for art to be a space where we are able to sit in the most uncomfortable place, where we're able to sit in the muckety muck and not run away. I often say that, like, I believe in the beauty of a trigger, because when something gets triggered, that means that you are being activated. And if there's an activation, that means that there is an opportunity for deeper study. There's something to be said, though, about a trigger that dehumanizes and makes another person object, right? So finding the balance between those things, I think that's where art makers have a lot of power, and a lot of ways to tell different stories.
I'm not very flowing with you all. But also, the question was, sorry, how would you assess the status of women's rights in 2024? So in recent years, much research suggests that empowering women is one of the most effective ways to address social issues such as persistent poverty and HIV/AIDS pandemic, especially in low-income countries. So empowering women is more effective in bringing the community up, addressing social issues that are pressing in their communities. And yet, about 2/3 of the world's illiterate adults are women. So there are a lot of work to be done in order for us to continue to fight for women's rights. And also that would then positively affect many other social issues.
Where in sort of the research that you've been looking into, where do you see the shift depending on age? I'm just thinking about older women and their needs. And I think a lot of our social justice issues center around people of childbearing age, right? Folks who have a fertile womb. And I was wondering, like, in your research and the things that you investigate, how are the conversations of equity and inequity for older bodied folks?
So my research on older folks, it was particularly focusing on Asian American population. So among Asian Americans, we have a variety of ways of entry paths and also different time frames. So for example, I interviewed a lot of Japanese American folks, both fifth generation to first generation, and their needs are so diverse. So even within the same racial ethnic group, the experiences were completely different. Also, a couple of folks I interviewed had the experience of internment. So they're still kind of recovering from the trauma across generations. One of them were born during the intern, and he shared a big story about what happened. And it was very touching, but also it was like deeply wounded stories. And yeah, so I guess that speaks to the intersectionality part where you cannot just frame this older folks problem, right? It's more diverse, depending on who you are, where you come from. All these statuses intersect to create different problems, different opportunities.
I just think about all of the various issues within one household, right? You have like an entire household and they all have specific inequities and social justice needs. So what is the mechanism that raises all votes for everyone, right? I don't know, have you found it yet?
No. No, but I think that, storytelling, like you mentioned, does a lot of that work generationally. So sort of keeping those narratives going and keeping them alive. And I also think the creation of, counterpublics to have those spaces of community, and the text within those counterpublics become things like art and, you know, even sort of like deep-seated cultural moments that draw folks together in conversation over time to continue to, it's not bucket by bucket, it's drip by drip. And so to raise the boats that way. And I mean, I think that's in this neoliberal moment, where we're rooting for a Black woman who, you know, was also a cop for president. I think it's drip by drip.
Successes, and where do you see a need for room to grow?
Okay, all right. So where do I see success as a need for room to grow? What I really think is awesome that's going on is this more embodied or material, to talk a little bit about that, understanding of art as a bricolage or a coming together of individual pieces to a collective whole. I think that that's more and more recognized, and an understanding of the reflexivity and social position of the artist and how that impacts the work. And the curator's website sort of offers that, like these folks are and where they're coming from. And that really does, and it does the important work of drawing the people into conversation to answer the question, how is the body speaking? Rather than answering for other, you're answering for self, and that becomes even more powerful in conversation.
Sorry, I'm not following well. So, how do I see success? Yeah. I think that we have seen success in small groups as we fight for women's and human rights, and we still need a lot of work. And for us to continue to fight for women's and human rights, I say locally, small scale, because if we try to work on the women's rights, it's this over encompassing big thing that's really scary, right? So do a little bit of what you can do, right, to start. And because I don't want to get overwhelmed with the women's rights, and also what that means differ again depending on the personality of the individual, but we all can chip in a way that is relevant to us. So there's this book called End of Capitalism as We Know It, right? So, sorry, I'm a Marxist sociologist. So, you know, capitalism, much like the women's rights, right? It looks like this humongous monster that we cannot fight against. You know, it's not like we can do anything really deal with it as it's over there. But you can see all the possibilities in small pockets, right? Also at the individual level, we can also unlearn a lot of gender ideologies, right? So we are all exposed to those images, narratives, discourses that shape, you know, what women should be, what men should be like, what men can do, what women can do. These are all made up ideas, right? So we can unlearn so that we are not making assumptions about the different individuals, unless we engage in dialogue, conversation, exercise empathy. We really don't know their stories, right? So I think it's important that we take interest in each other's life, discuss, talk about our experiences, and kind of affirm and legitimate each other's stories, right? Instead of making judgment or making assumption about it. Also, dismantling those essentialized notion about what women is like, women are naturally caring and nurturing, for example, that may even limit our way of thinking about possibilities. So I think that's individually thinking through. And also we need to challenge existing ideologies, representations, because those are the things that get stored in our head. That file, that's what we see, that's how we interpret things. So we need to have more representation of diverse voices, diverse individuals, represented all throughout the society. Right? Also at the institutional level, like I'm teaching sociology, social change always begin with people at the bottom coming together, making claims, changing and reframing discourse, dialogue, and then as we have power in our body count, ultimately bring about changes at the institutional level. And once we engage in dialogue, at the end of the day, we all share struggles, we all share what we want to see. Right? So long as we genuinely have the discussion, we come to conclusion, or we all want the same thing. We all have struggles in similar areas. So that's when we can put together the body count, disrupt business as usual, bring about positive changes.
So the question was within our assessment, where success, yes, or need for growth. So where I see the most success is when Black women, girls, and Black queer communities have platforms to organize and collaborate without other folks seeing those spaces as a threat because they're excluded from them. The most marginalized should be allowed to talk amongst themselves without their allies taking up all the space in the discourse. And I think that's one of the things that I see success in people growing within their particular subset of identities and communities. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? So that's where I see a lot of success when I look at Black collaborative groups together, Black queer collaborative groups, Black work that Black trans artists and activists are doing together, that we can all have our spaces and still be in conversation with one another, and that there's no, that exclusion does not mean harm. Because there are some serious forces at work, and this is where I see there's growth. There's forces at work fighting to claw back the rights of Black, queer, and women folk around the world. In art and design industries, in academia, in politics, and at the same time, there's this increased access to media making and information sharing and online organizing, you name it, all of these different platforms. And the one thing I continue to be stymied about is by people's inability to recognize when they are wielding misogynoir to harm Black women and girls in their activism, in their art making, in their conversations, in their hot takes. Like the war on DEI and CRT is specifically aimed at diminishing Black female intellectual power and cultural labor. And that is where I see that there's a need for some growth. And when people are trying to defend equality for all, often they miss the fact that they are misusing the frameworks put together by Black feminist intellectuals. They're muddying down things to flatten the discourse that came around the ways that they made those assumptions. They're wielding the names of people. They talking outside of their mouths about folks they don't know anything whatsoever about. And those are the things that I think we need a little growth around. Let Black women's words speak for themselves.
Give it all you can.
This has been an amazing discussion. So grateful for all of the things that you've shared tonight. It's fantastic. Do you have questions? Anna?
Be afraid that the semester just started, y'all. You guys are that tired already. Would you please define misogynoir? Yes, misogynoir is misogynoir is a term that was created by, Moya Bailey. And it speaks to the intersection of anti-Black Blackness and sexism that Black women specifically are dealing with. So the way racism and sexism shows up in the discourse and in the ways that harms are perpetuated.
In the same vein, Desirée, can you explain a little bit more about the monstrous and failure and how you sort of see that perhaps intersecting with the maybe posters, or really just more about what that is, I think, for people to really understand
Yeah.
what that means, because it's such a
Yeah, so, I first came across this frame of the monstrous, from Patricia Hill Collins, and Hill Collins says that we create cultural monsters. This status quo creates cultural monsters of what they fear the most. And so we can see stereotypes and prejudice reflected in the things we're most scared of. And I'm talking about literal monsters, like the monsters in horror films, et cetera, or the boogeyman across the street type of thing. And so that's how our monsters get perpetuated. And I just read this amazing book by Laura Elkin called Art Monsters, where she reframes radical feminist performance art within the trope of the monstrous. And so radical feminist performance artists like Carol Lee Schneeman, or her work, the image is called Props, and her first and last name is now escaping me, though I know the title of the artwork. It is her first name has 3 letters. Anyway, so about those two come to mind. So this really monstrous femininity where you see, and some of the images upstairs reflect this. You see the body exposed in ways that you don't necessarily see, or you shouldn't see and shouldn't be allowed in our front stage lives, our public lives. You see the blood, you see the shit, you see the things that we all deal with in that front view. And so when we think about the reclamation of the monstrous, it's the folks who get labeled as monsters doing the work, putting their bodies out there was that me? Putting their bodies, yeah, it was me. Putting their, hold on. Oh.
Timed out.
Did it? Oh, there we go. Putting their bodies out there and doing work. Drip by drip. I love this metaphor, and I'm gonna keep saying it over and over again. Because really, and I love the vibes of this panel where it's like, it's sort of pushing back against that neoliberal understanding of not only politics, but of the institution that asks us to, work and perform labor that even works against our own cultural struggles. And so, I'm thinking of like neuroqueer or neurodiverse folks who, have to sit in certain spaces over and over again and can't move and can't get up because there's certain restrictions on the body. But the body is messy. The body is abject, and the body is full of yucky fluid stuff that we all have and we all keep secret. And the posters upstairs, they help expose some of that.
Okay, all right. I'm thinking, so what happens, right? So we see all the bodies with all the mess and all the drippy drips and the shits and the things. But what happens when certain bodies people become, not just trope, but people become desensitized to seeing certain bodies in positions of pain, wounding, and death. So a lot of the research I will look at is I'm like, so how do we sit with viral violence, right? How do we sit with pain, wounding, and death imagery? So what happens when the monstrous, when there's how do we combat, or how do you see people addressing the numbing effect that happens from seeing certain bodies in pain all the time. Certain bodies, it's just a combination of parts. Certain bodies, as to some extent, always in a state of monstrousness, right? So,
I think too, a lot of that is sort of what I'm like edging towards is this critique of clicks and capitalism, is who's doing the filming and who's doing the production. And it's almost always not those folks. And so if you're going to, do that, like Shirley Schneeman and all of her work, for example, she's doing that work with her own body. She is putting it out there, and there's agency and choice in those moments. And I think what you're talking about misses that agentic moment where the artist or the actor or the person who is victimized by the viral video that's getting clicked isn't seeing any social production from that. There's no there for them. And so they're still monstrous. It doesn't do the work because they're not doing that creation. And that's what I mean by that bricolage stuff is like, who's putting the pieces together? That becomes real damn important when it's stuff that becomes grotesque. Yeah. Any other questions? Moderating.
I don't really know how to phrase this, but if you were to give a recommendation for learning more about, like, in your own specific fields, the current landscape of feminism, do you have any recommendations?
Thinking a little bit more about sort of state feminism and sort of social inequality as it relates to women, or
In film or in performance or from a sociological perspective.
good work that you're saying.
Well, that Elkins book just came out and I dig it. It's called Art Monsters. It's actually a popular press book, so it's pretty accessible. Yeah, I just read Mimi Cook, KHUC. She's a radical social activist that talks about unwellness. And that we're actually all unwell. It's the healthy people that are driving damaging productivity. Letters to Elia, I think is the name of the book, just came out. Yeah, I don't know, that's what comes to mind right now. But there's old like spiritual
I'm thinking just sort of piggybacking a bit on something I talked about earlier in terms of like the uses of Black feminist intellectual labor. There's a new book that's come out by Alexis Pauline Gumbs where she looks at the work of Audre Lorde and she reclaims the language of Audre Lorde and the parts of Audre Lorde that are often sort of obscured in our activist dialogue, as well as situating her as a global citizen. And I think that's an interesting way to look at sort of the history of how Black women's intellectual labor gets misused and a reclamation of that, if that's something that you're interested
What was that?
in. I am blanking on the names, but the writer is Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs, and it's her newest book on Audre Lorde. Survival is not a promise. Aha, that is the title. Facebook and the Finders Group. Yes, so survival is not a promise.
I am not teaching this thing, but I usually teach sociology of gender during the spring semester, and I teach that through intersectional lens as well as framing it through human rights framework. So take my time. But it really is like my favorite class. Last spring I had class. It's amazing.
And I thought it.
In the last couple of years, have you seen any particular protest efforts that spoke to you as particularly effective in pushing forward human rights?
There's some work going on. You can follow them on Twitter. I'm not gonna say X. And it's workshop 4, the number 4 VADA. And it's a collective of academics, artists, and activists who put on virtual and in-person performances, workshops, like translation workshop. I mean, all sorts of different types of interesting things, and all the proceeds benefit the working class. And I think that that's really important because, first of all, it's direct, and second of all, it calls upon skill sets of activists that, you know, like look at all these interesting niche things that we can do to help others, and use our labor in productive ways.
The thing that comes to my mind the most is, I'm a designer, by the way, so, is the opportunities where books are written about educating designers about the field of design itself. And that it's tie-in with capitalism in particular and the effects of that. So the 2 books that I have in my mind at the moment are, I'm like not gonna remember his name, but it's Design and Politics, Design as Politics. Ruben Pater, that's his name, Ruben Pater. He also just wrote one about how to untangle design from capitalism, and I've only gotten through like, I don't know, maybe 6 chapters in, and my mind's been blown in every single chapter about how little I know about how things really work. And the impact of how, the impact that I don't understand how these things have worked. And that the impact is big and you don't realize it unless you know. So I don't have a specific particular activist movement at the moment in my brain because I haven't finished that book yet, and it feels like I'm participating in activism every time I turn. So
The manuscript I'm working on right now is actually looking at sort of 2 different ways to think about activism, and I'm hoping I can pull some good stuff in there. One of the ways I am sort of looking at how we empathetically witness viral pain currently. I sort of developed this way of watching viral videos that stimulates mirror neurons in the brain so that you can actually have an empathetic response to the thing that you're watching. And I'm also putting that in conversation with artists who have been responding to anti-Black violence globally. And one of the things I'm really trying to pull together are interviews with Black artists who work abroad, who work on social justice issues abroad, because one of the things that I recognized during the 2020 global uprisings after the murder of George Floyd that bubbled up and, of course, burst, because that's the way activism around anti-Blackness happens, are the number of ways that images of Black pain and Black suffering circulate globally, and how images of George Floyd came up on walls in places so far and removed from the US, and how people so use these folks, these figures as effigies for their own specific movements that they have in their own global neighborhoods. So those are the kinds of things I'm looking at. How does it travel? And how are artists using other people's experiences to further their own activism that's very homegrown and sort of focused on their own inequalities. So, yeah, hopefully that'll be helpful when it comes out next year. Yeah.
Another one. So I work with an organization called Marked by COVID, and my sabbatical performance was October 4th and 5th here to you in 3059. It's free if you want to come. It's based off some of the work that I did, some interviews I did with activists in Marked by COVID who were looking for ways to memorialize over the million of our friends, family, and colleagues that died of COVID. And to hold politicians accountable for failed policy decisions during that time. So It's both memorialization and accountability. And I think that's a unique way of thinking about memorialization in COVID. And so it's a great space, and they're always looking for folks.
So sometimes social movement, activism in response to political, whatever climate that's going on. So we saw, especially being close to DC, we saw, Women's March and Black Lives Matter. And, in response to police brutality, a lot of students actually organized, right? So, as students, you all have the power to create change, right? Whatever way you can. And I think that's really important. Young people need to be more engaged with imminent social issues because you're the ones who are going to be creating future.
That means that universities should not shut down protests.
As the perfect feminist.
The question was, is there such a thing as a perfect feminist? Yeah.
I think about it through like an American perspective, where like, I guess like sometimes I think about it through like where I've been in like predominantly white areas where there'll be like white feminists who are like supposedly very radicalized, but they're not. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, but to them, they're like, oh, I'm so progressive and da da da. And I'm like, yeah, but you're still contributing to like all these problems.
We're all perfect. No, like, I'm not being facetious. We are divine beings having a human experience. And because of that human experience, there are multiple lenses that we address and use in the world, and that can shift. I think a perfect feminist is someone who's always doing the work on themselves. The end. Because the more you are sent on it, the more what is inside you and out, and the things that you do outside of it are lockstep together, the stronger your activism becomes, the bigger your heart becomes, the more deliberate you become. So a perfect feminist is someone who's willing to keep doing the work on themselves. Because nobody's freaking perfect, but we can always keep working on ourselves.
I think I can understand where you're coming from. Feminism, especially in the United States, starting with, wealthy white women being able to access higher education, joining in the conversation, right? They're pushing their agenda, claiming sisterhood, right? The women, right? But with their privilege, right, in terms of socioeconomic status, race, they erased the voices of all the other women, right? They felt that they knew what all women wanted coming from the privileged standpoint. So, as the time progressed, more women of color participating in this dialogue conversation, bringing in their perspective. Hey, you may want to go have the right to be able to go out to work, right? But many women of color, especially Black women, hey, I would rather stay home. Our people did not have the luxury to stay home and raise our own kids. We were busy raising someone else's kids, right? And then as more time progressed, women located in global south, their needs and their wants are quite different, right? So we all need to be humble, reflective of what we are claiming, and not erasing other people's voices and viewpoints and their desires and wants.
Gloria Anzaldúa, she's a Chicana feminist, and she says that what we do is we reach in to the depths of our heart and we pull it out and we reach across a divided bridge with two things, with critique, but also with empathy. And it's empathy that forces us into a position of reflexivity, to knowing your subject position and the folks around you and the radical context in which you exist. And so I think her words are so powerful because you're really sort of reaching inside your being, holding out your heart and offering both critique and empathy. Those things simultaneously is so vulnerable. and to ask for that in return, I don't know, you said perfect feminist, I was like, no, anyone that says that is the worst. No judgment, but judgment. And Anthropology comes to mind, because it's a both and, on either or.
When you are curating your project or anything that has to deal with community, and you're seeing other designers do it too as well, as far as other than learning about the community you're about to research, what are some things like process and the final outcome that designers have missed the luck or could have pushed more when they're doing these things?
I'm not a designer. But I do performance work, and I also am a qualitative researcher, so I work with communities directly. And I think two things are the entrance and the exit. It's doing the work in the beginning to be a part of the community, not just stepping in and saying, I've got this, I'm going to do this for you. But it's also the exit, it's debriefing, and it's engaging with participants and saying, what do you think about this before I show it to everyone else? Yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
I think I'm a huge advocate for being very self-reflective at every stage of a research project or every stage of a piece of work. So to create and then stop and sit with it, and see what's happening inside and write about that and understand what positions you're bringing to it. And then it's engaging other people, like in documentary, where we are often meeting people and we're interviewing them and they're telling really important things and very intimate stories. It's about making sure that you're getting it right and giving them a chance to look and hear themselves and see themselves before you say, okay, that's the edit, that's how it works. So being in that constant process of being self-reflective, and then also allowing the folks that you are seeing the documentary work as like a collaboration, not extractive, but a collaboration. I think those two things are most important, at least from a filmmaking perspective.
So from a design perspective, I think it would vary with every single designer you talk to. But we were just talking about this in package design. Where are my package design students? Are you here? We were just talking about this. My experience in the field is that you do not always have enough information when you're given a project to work on. And you're not going to get an opportunity to meet with the community to do it. So that means that part of how I view my responsibility as a designer is to be mindful of where it's going, be mindful that even though I cannot reach the audience that I'm talking to, I need to know who they are. And I need to remember that I have experiences that I bring with me to the design that may or may not be useful or appropriate for what I'm working on. So there's sort of a level of position that I teach students to think about. Like, what are the impacts of what I'm making? Do I understand the community or culture that this is going out in to be a part of? There's larger questions that I don't think business necessarily always has the time to take into account, but it's something that I can ask for more information on when I'm in a project. Explain to me a little bit better what some of the needs are for people that I'm designing for. Because I can't design with them because it's not possible. So I need to know more about them so that I can do the best that I can with the information that I have. But because design is becoming more and more global every single day, so my hope is that the industry is doing much bigger, broader conversations about that than the experiences that I've had before I moved into academia.